All right, everyone. This is Rob Orson with Emerging Revolutionary War. We're here live, one of our few lives we've done this year. So I was sitting here looking at my phone, making sure we were going live. So sometimes Zoom is a little delayed on telling us when we're live. So thank you for you all for who are watching live. Again, this will be put on our YouTube and Spotify channels for those who want to listen later on. I'm very happy to have our good friend here, Gabe Neville here, who has been with us before. We were just talking about that before we went live. You said, well, about 5 years ago, right? Right during COVID.
Yeah, we did one on the Eighth Virginia with Mike Cecere, and then we did another one on the war in the I think war on the West
Oh, that's right, with
with a
Eric
guy
Stone.
from Vincennes, a
Yeah,
ranger, and I can't remember who else.
time flies, right?
Yeah, it does. Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for thanks for being here. And Gabe's been a good friend of ours and a good supporter of ours, and we try to support his work. And so tonight we're talking not just about the Eighth Virginia, which I guess is the focus, but we're talking about his latest book, which highly recommend this book. We're going to dive into it here. If you follow him on his Eighth Virginia blog, you know that there's really, and Gabe, this is me just blowing sunshine. You are the most detail-oriented person when it comes to a Revelry regiment that I've ever met or read before. So congratulations on that. And I say that because, I know the research in here has been thoroughly done. And Gabe was nice enough to let a few of us at ERW read over the manuscript before he published it. And I mean, it was just amazing the amount of research you've done on this.
Well, if I could respond to that,
Sure.
it is possible to be too detailed. As you will remember, the early draft had a long section on Dunmore's War, where most of these soldiers got their first military experience. And someone, I think it may have been you, sent me a very kind note saying, "Gabe, you don't even mention the Eighth Virginia Regiment until page 50 of the manuscript."
That might have
That,
been me.
that's when I knew I needed to cut out basically a whole chapter. And I'm
Well,
glad
I
I did. That
mean,
was good advice.
well, no, I mean, it's all about the publisher too. We all know working with publishers, they have page limits in their mind. So, very rarely do they let us have a blank slate on the number of pages we want to
Yeah.
include. So let's dive in, and I'm going to ask the typical questions you probably heard and expect to hear. And I think I already asked you this many years ago, but what draws you to this unit, this particular regiment?
Yeah. Well, so a few things. I'm older than you. I'm 58 years old. So I was an 8-year-old in 1976. So I remember the bicentennial. I lived in Pennsylvania, close to Valley Forge Park. There was a veteran cemetery walking distance from my house. And the one thing I like to tell people is my sister had a subscription to National Geographic. And the July 1976 issue had a photo spread of veterans of the Revolutionary War. I think we might be up to 14 or 15 identified images now, but at that time, I think there were just 8 or 9 that were known. And I remember just staring at those pictures for, it was probably minutes, but I remember it as hours, just mesmerized. So I've had a lifelong fascination with the Revolutionary War. Um, like the Eighth Virginia soldiers, I grew up in Pennsylvania and moved to Virginia. Um, I've got an interest in Peter Muhlenberg, partly for that reason. I worked in Congress for almost 20 years, and I walked past a statue of Peter Muhlenberg probably 4 times a week. And once I started on this, every time I looked at that statue, it was sort of a, get back to work moment, right? Um, and I have 4 Revolutionary War ancestors. One was a notorious Tory, part of Fanning's Rangers in North Carolina. The other 3 were patriots. One was in the Eighth Virginia in William Cron's company up from Pittsburgh. So those are the things that drew me to the regiment.
Yeah, some personal connection. There's the love of the history and then personal connection, which always, I think, leads a
Yeah,
lot of us to different things we research,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And speaking of research, how, I mean, this seems to be one of the most well-documented units out there. I know there's a lot of units in the Revolutionary War history that have unit histories, but the amount of information that you have found, why do you think that is? Why do you think this unit, not just because of what you've been doing on your blog, but it resounds in memory. A lot has been written
Mhm.
about it, by the veterans and during the war. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. So I guess I've got a couple things to say about that. Actually would dispute the notion that the regiment has been well documented
Mm,
previously. Peter Muhlenberg has been very much documented. Mike Cecere wrote a great book on General Muhlenberg a few years ago, and his the story of his farewell sermon in Woodstock. Uh, it's still, in the stratosphere of Revolutionary War lore, but not like it was, say, 100 years ago. Um, it actually happened. We won't waste time talking about that. There's been some question about how historical the event is. I don't doubt that it actually happened. Uh, it was fictionalized in an epic poem in the 1860s. Thomas Buchanan Reed wrote an epic poem called The Wagoner of the Alleghenies that had a sort of inspired by actual events version of the story. That was excerpted and put in McGuffey's Readers. So basically,
mm,
every school child in America for two or three generations read a jazzed up version of the story. Um, and that is what led to the statue of Peter Muhlenberg in the U.S. Capitol, for example.
mhm,
Um, uh, but at the same time, there were historians. The primary historian of the Shenandoah Valley, John Wayland, um, said in the 1940s that there just weren't the records out there to do a history of the regiment. And
mm,
another local historian had said, I think in 1902, that specifically for Augusta County, which raised a company, that just nothing survived. Well, I'm happy to say they were wrong. I was challenged by a research librarian at the David Library of the American Revolution years ago when I went in to poke around. He said, "Oh no, there's stuff out there. You just have to go find it." And no, here I am many years later. I found it, and we've got a
Well,
book.
well, I have two follow-ups. One, how many years on the book? If you had to guess, right? I mean,
So, I mean, I have figured out that I'm pretty sure that that moment at the David Library was 1998.
mhm,
Uh, but that's not the answer because I wasn't really researching all that time. It wasn't really until a couple of years after I moved to Washington in 2000 that I discovered that I was working across the street from the world's greatest research library. And I started going over there and poking around, and it sort of built a head of steam. So it was. I tell people it was an interest that turned into a hobby, that turned into an obsession, that turned into a website, and turned into a book contract, and then a book. So I tell people I was researching it for 20 years, maybe writing, putting words to paper for 10.
right. I
But
know ever since
yeah.
I've met you, you said you've been working on it, so um, it's got to be a big relief to you, right? Like,
Yeah, you know what's funny? Yeah, I mean, you've written books, Rob, so you know how you agonize over each word. You want to make sure that there are no typos, no mistakes, no, that you've worded things just right. I went over this thing, 1,000 times. You went over it for me. Many other people did. When I received it in the mail, when I got it in the mail, um, I fully expected to find something wrong, and I won't say what it is, but I found a couple little things that I wish I'd worded differently or whatever.
Sure.
So, but I was surprised. My reaction was not to wince or say, "Oh man, I blew it." It was my reaction was, "Well, doesn't matter now."
Well,
so,
yeah,
so it really is a relief. I'm done.
and that's true for everybody, as you know. I mean, once you do something, you look back at a year or even a month later, like, I would have moved this around.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
um, well, you didn't dive into the Muhlenberg story, but I'm going to make you do that
okay,
because you brought it up.
yeah, yep,
And I think he's a good place for to start talking about the unit because, as you said, he's one of the more famous members of the unit. We're going to dive into some of the other guys I
mhm,
want to hear you talk about, but as a kid here in Virginia, I heard that story too, right? Like
yeah.
that was like, right. So if you can, if you don't, if you can, yeah, don't, just don't mind if you don't mind me asking, can you just give a quick synopsis of the Muhlenberg story of what happened there in the valley when he decided
Yeah.
to fight?
Okay, well let me go back just a little bit before because it's interesting Virginia history. Um, the lower Shenandoah Valley, which means the northern Shenandoah Valley,
Right.
because the river flows that way, was very heavily German in the 1770s, still is by descent. Uh, they came down what was called the Great Wagon Road from Pennsylvania. They were immigrants who came through Philadelphia. Um, Many of them didn't even speak German or didn't even speak English. Uh, the when and they were mostly Lutheran, which is not so different from Anglican, but Virginia law required that each county have a parish with an Anglican rector, and all the citizens of that parish had to tithe or pay taxes to that parish. Well, Lutherans were not real thrilled with the idea of supporting their own Lutheran church and the Anglican church. And there had actually been a church in Culpeper County that had gone through this, and they were pretty unhappy about it. So James Wood, who later was the colonel of the
Mhm.
12th Virginia Regiment, he traveled up to Pennsylvania and met with Peter Muhlenberg's father, Henry, who was the grand poobah of the American Lutheran Church, and said, "Hey, we could use a German-speaking rector down in Beckford Parish, Shenandoah County, or what was then Dunmore County, but he'll have to go to London to get ordained." And Henry said, "Well, how about my son Peter?" So Peter traveled to London, got ordained as an Anglican. So he was not an ordained Lutheran pastor. People get this wrong a lot. He was raised Lutheran, he was trained as a Lutheran.
Mm.
Theologically, there's not much difference, but he was ordained an Anglican priest and then came and became the rector of Beckford Parish in Woodstock, Virginia. Um, so he started that in 1772 and quickly became a community leader, um, beyond just his church duties, uh, to include the Committee of Correspondence, the county committee, what most people call the Committee of Safety. They just called it the county committee back then. He was elected to the House of Burgesses, and when the war started, the first two Virginia regiments were the first and second, commanded initially by Patrick Henry and William Woodford. And then late in 75, they authorized several new regiments, and they decided, you know what? These Germans over in the valley, across the Blue Ridge, we're not sure they're going to be too excited about enlisting in a German, an English-speaking army. Maybe if we make Peter Muhlenberg a colonel,
Mm.
right, then they'll enlist. In fact, there were all three field officers were German. Peter Muhlenberg, Abraham Bowman, and Peter Helfenstein, who was from Winchester. Um, the the regiment recruited 10 companies from 8 different counties, though. So they were from all over the west of Virginia, all the way up to Pittsburgh, in fact. Um, so I estimate that no more than about 40% of the regiment was actually German. But because of the field officers, it was called the German Regiment. When that was fully recruited, Peter Muhlenberg gave a final farewell sermon from his church in Woodstock. The story that used to be told, I think we've corrected this now, is that he took the pulpit with his black cloak on, gave a sermon from Ecclesiastes 3, which is familiar to people of a certain age from the Bird song, Turn, Turn, Turn. Uh, Others from the Bible itself. It says, among other things, that there's time for peace and a time for war. And as the story goes, he then ripped off his cloak to reveal his continental uniform and said, let's go to war, boys. And every man in the church enlisted, and they rode off and beat the
Love it.
redcoats.
Love it. Here,
It's a
here.
great story, but it's not true. He did give the sermon. It was a farewell sermon. He wore the cloak as a matter of propriety. There was no surprise. There was no reveal. The regiment was already fully enlisted. He had a uniform, but it was almost certainly a hunting shirt. He wasn't
Right.
even a Continental officer because there were no Virginia Continental troops yet at that time. Um, so, there's been some artistic license, but the story's true, sort of.
Well, I mean, even that little detail of change from what was been advertised, and lore is still a pretty fascinating story considering,
Yeah.
his role in the community as a faith leader and
Yeah.
They become something completely different.
Yeah.
Um, so we do have a question here in the chat, and if you're watching live, please put questions in the chat. It kind of relates to what we're talking about. Do religious resentments contribute to the county there and the people in the valley opposing the British?
In that area, not amongst the Germans,
Okay.
but amongst the Scotch Irish, yes. Right. So I said about 40% of the regiment was German. I'd say another 40% were Scotch Irish. And when you say Irish, people usually think Catholic. Catholic
Hmm.
Irish were not allowed to immigrate to the
Right.
colonies. So these were Protestant Irish from Northern Ireland, almost exclusively. Um, they were Presbyterians, and they had not been treated well by the what was called the Protestant ascendancy in Ireland. They were used to resenting the Anglican Church. Um, Interestingly, when they came here um, down in Augusta County, they actually took control of the Anglican parish vestry. Right, so you had an Anglican vestry controlled by Presbyterians. They even sent one of their guys to England to get ordained, but it was kind of a ruse. And then they did it again. And then finally, in the late 1760s or something, the House of Burgesses dissolved the vestry and said, "Okay, that's long enough. We can't pretend any longer."
Right.
Right? Uh, and if you read the Augusta County Resolves from 17, no, the Fincastle Resolves from 1774, they talk specifically about their religious concerns. So
Mm.
the Presbyterian Scotch Irish had real free exercise issues,
Yeah, there's a
but
lot.
not but not the Lutherans. There's really not much theological difference between Lutheran and Anglican.
Yeah, my ancestors on my mother's side were Lutheran and they fought from Culpeper, so they didn't have
Mm,
any, and they were German, they didn't have any issues. So, but it's a good question nevertheless. So you kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's dive a little bit deeper of how the regiment is formed.
yeah,
You go into a lot of detail in the book about where the companies are from, the
right.
communities they're raised in, which is fascinating. If you kind of just give a quick overview of where these different companies of the regiment are from
Mhm.
and how they come together as a whole unit.
Yeah. So I'll try to name the counties from memory. Um, so I just think of the Shenandoah Valley, or what we call the Valley of Virginia, if you extend all the way down south. At the top, you've got Berkeley County, and then below that, Frederick County, which is where Winchester is, which is the largest town in the valley, and then Dunmore County, which is today's Shenandoah County, and then below that, Augusta County. So Augusta County was predominantly Scotch Irish. The counties above it were predominantly uh, German. Um, each of them, each county in the entire colony was uh, tasked with raising either one or two companies, um, depending on its population. The companies were later assigned to regiments. So the only exception to that was the Eighth Virginia, the German regiment. The Virginia Convention had a special mission for the Eighth, so its field officers were all elected at the same time, which was unusual. Um, the companies were regimented from the beginning, which was unusual, and it was also designated an all rifle regiment, which was unusual.
Hmm.
Um, the right from the beginning, uh, every Virginia regiment had two or three rifle companies. They were always from the West. The belief was that the Western frontiersmen were ace marksmen and good with handy with a rifle. So they were uh, recruited to serve as light infantry, which mimicked the British practice of having flank companies of grenadiers and light infantry. Um, but the Eighth Virginia was all rifles. So you had those German companies from the counties I named, and then they skipped Botetourt County. There were no Eighth Virginia companies from Botetourt, and then you get to what was Fincastle County, which was a gigantic frontier county.
Right.
It's now all of the state of Kentucky, the bottom third of West Virginia, and the tail of Southwest Virginia. That was a true frontier area. um, and uh, also Scotch Irish. And then to the west, across the Alleghenies, Hampshire County raised a company, which was a mix. And then the Western District of Augusta County, which was treated as a separate county, um, it was another one of these huge frontier counties that went all the way past Pittsburgh. It raised two companies. Um, they never met unless they were from the same county until the rendezvous in Suffolk, Virginia, which is down near Portsmouth and Norfolk.
Which I'm glad and that great segue. What I'm going to bring up is that's very, then, I didn't realize that to reading your book that was the first time they all got together was, you would think Stanton or Woodstock or,
Yeah.
many different towns and villages on the Blue Ridge or in the valley, but no, it's Suffolk.
Yeah.
So explain a little bit about why that is. I mean, you do it in the book, but for the people
Well,
watching, explain
I
that.
mean, it's something like 450 miles from Pittsburgh to Suffolk, right? And it didn't make sense for, say, James Knox's company from Fincastle County to march north 300 miles to Woodstock to meet their colonel, and then march another whatever it is 350 miles to Suffolk. Now, some of them marched together. The two Dunmore counties, two Dunmore County companies marched together. It's possible that maybe that. Well, I don't actually know. It's not possible. Um, so I think those two might be the only two that marched together. The rest of them, and a couple of the companies actually missed the rendezvous. The Fincastle company was late and had to run to catch up with the regiment when it was sent south. And William Cron's West Augusta company arrived more than a month late after the regiment had gone.
So why Suffolk?
Okay, so if you look at a map of the lower Tidewater, this what we call the south side below the James, where you've got Norfolk and Portsmouth, and then a little bit further, those are on the Elizabeth River,
Hmm.
and then the next river west is the Nansemond River, um, which has a wide estuary, and then just below that is the Great Dismal Swamp, which was even greater and more dismal back then.
Right. Yeah,
and,
right.
and right between the estuary and the swamp is Suffolk, right? So it was a choke point from the territory east of there, which was dominated by Tories,
Right.
and the rest of Virginia, which was Whig. Um, and their very first task was to stop loyalists east of Suffolk from supplying Dunmore's floating city or floating town, they called it, of Tories and escaped slaves,
Hmm.
and some trained military that were living on boats in the lower James.
So let's talk about the unit as a whole. You mentioned Suffolk. This is one of the most well-traveled units. Of course, a lot of Virginia regiments are well-traveled,
Mhm.
but just kind of give a cursory overview of the first couple of years of the war here and the different fights these men are fighting in the different areas. Because if you grew up in Fincastle County and you end up in some of these places, it's a world away for a lot of these kids.
Yeah, I mean, and kids is right. I mean, you only had to
Mhm.
be 16. And
Right.
and I estimate the average age was maybe 20, 21. So a lot of them really were, pimply faced teenage boys who'd never been away from home. Uh, so the rendezvous was in Suffolk. They arrived over a couple of months, one at a time. The officers received their commissions, their provincial commissions. That becomes important later. Uh, and then Charles Lee shows up and says, "Okay, we've got solid intel that Henry Clinton and Charles Cornwallis are headed south. So I'm looking for the best equipped, best armed, most complete regiment to come with me." And he identifies the Eighth Virginia as that regiment. He's very explicit about that. So he takes them out of the colony and they march south. Not all of the companies have arrived. Knox's Fincastle Company and Cron's West Augusta Company have not yet arrived. They head south into North Carolina, which is explicitly not their job. right? They are provincial soldiers. They are not continental soldiers. In fact, uh, the, uh, Virginia had been given a quota of 6 provincial or continental regiments, and the officers of the more senior regiments made a point of making sure the Eighth Virginia didn't get continental status, and yet it was that regiment that was taken out of the colony.
Hmm.
So the soldiers start to gripe, like, this is literally not what I signed up for, right? Uh, and some of them desert. Um, some of them are recaptured, some are not. And then they march down to Charleston. They participate in the Battle of Sullivan's Island. They're not in the fort, Fort Moultrie or Fort Sullivan. They're on the opposite end of the island at the breach, what today is called the Breach Inlet,
Right.
blocking an attempted, we would call it now, I guess, an amphibious assault from a neighboring barrier island. They're successful in that. Uh, they they then celebrate the Declaration of Independence on August 5th at Charleston's Liberty Tree. Uh, and then they all get sick, like badly sick with malaria. Uh, so 150 of them are essentially hospitalized. And then Charles Lee observes that Lord Dunmore's gone. The governors of North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia are all gone. But Tories have been fleeing to East Florida, which is a new British colony from the French and Indian War. Um, and the East Florida Rangers are starting to conduct raids into Georgia. So he decides, well, I guess we're heading to St. Augustine, boys. So they march south. They make it as far as they go through Savannah, and they make it to Sunbury, Georgia, and then they bog down. The rest of the men are terribly sick. William Moultrie said that they were burying 15 men a day.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Jonathan Clark, who kept a diary, you can look at his diary, just page after page after page for months. He just writes sick, sick, sick. Um, uh, and then keeping this very high level. In December, they are released to go home, uh, and each man makes his own way home. They're just put on furlough because some are able to go, some have a horse, some are hobbling, some can't go at all. So they're just all put on furlough, and they have to report to Fredericksburg when they get there. So put a pin in that. Meanwhile, William Cron's company, which arrived late and missed the rendezvous,
Hmm.
they are assigned to the 1st Virginia Regiment back in August of 76, along with a bunch of other stragglers, 8th Virginia stragglers, and they go north. So while Peter Muhlenberg and the others are in the south, William Cron and a sizable detachment, about a fifth of the regiment, they head north, and they're with Washington through everything in that year. The Trenton, Princeton, Mamaroneck, White Plains, all of that. They attempt to recruit and refill the regiment after the 76 campaign. Uh, uh, they're not very successful because people are less enthusiastic about fighting now that they've seen the results. They reconvene in New Jersey. Keeping it simple, they participate in the Philadelphia campaign, which is Cooch's Bridge, Brandywine, Germantown. At Valley Forge, the original enlistees in the spring, their enlistments expire. They enlisted for 2 years. Some of them re-enlisted. There were new enlistees, so the regiment still existed, but it was depleted, seriously depleted. They were merged with the 4th and the 12th to create what was literally called the 4th, 8th, 12th Regiment. They go to Monmouth in that capacity. They are then folded into the 4th Virginia, and after a couple of years, they're at Charleston where they all get captured, and that's sort of the end of the pedigree for the 8th Virginia Regiment.
I mean, that's just crazy thinking about how they're like the Ferris Bueller, right? They're everywhere. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
not Ferris Bueller, oh God, Forrest
Forrest
Gump.
Gump.
Sorry, I'm
Forrest
getting
Gump.
my 90s
Yeah.
movies all done. Um,
Yeah.
now put you on the spot. Was there anyone in these units that was in the unit, the regiment, the entire time of all the different actions you just said, down to Georgia and then up to Valley Forge and et cetera? Was there anyone that did it
So
all?
no, because the regiment was divided
Right,
between the Cron detachment and the main portion of the regiment.
right.
But there were men, including some enlisted men, who stayed in service through the entire war. I have a list of them in the book.
And let's dive into that. I mean, kind of want you to kind of, it's gonna be hard for you, but pick some of the more favorite people that you researched in this book that you probably knew a little bit about because you've been reading about the Eighth for a long time, but really stood out to you um, and called out to you when you wrote this book.
Yeah.
If you just go over a few of those people that their stories are pretty amazing.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of them. One that is amazing enough that I actually think I might write a little biography of is William Dark. So he was the captain from Berkeley County. They're at the top of the Valley of Virginia, uh, on the Potomac River there. Um, so he was actually a cousin of Benjamin Rush, uh, but he had nothing in common with Benjamin Rush. He wasn't nearly that well educated or classy. He was a frontiersman through and through. He was friends with Daniel Morgan. Uh, he An early biography says that he was at Braddock's defeat in 1755. Don't know if that's true, but he himself said that he was in the service of his country in some capacity, uh, continuously from 1755 on. So that may or may not confirm that he was at Braddock's defeat. Um, he uh, was certainly a militia leader. It appears that he may have raised the Berkeley County Volunteer Company in 74, and then the Berkeley District Minute Battalion in 75, which was kind of a bust. And then one of the two Berkeley County companies for the provincial line. His, of course, assigned to the Eighth Virginia Regiment. Um, uh, he had to fight his way to get promoted to major. Story, I'll let you read the book. It's complicated. He was passed over unjustly, but he won the contest and got his promotion. He's then captured at the Battle of Germantown along with the entirety of the Ninth Virginia Regiment. Um, he's imprisoned in Philadelphia for as long as the British stay there, and then he's transported to Long Island. So he's a prisoner for 3 years. He's finally exchanged, has to walk all the way home. He's got like $3 in his pocket. And there's this really sweet story where he stops at a cabin on his way home to get something to eat. And the owner has a bird in a cage. And he asks if he can buy the bird. And he gives the owner one of his last dollars. And as soon as he buys the bird, he opens up the cage and lets the bird fly away. Right. He's just been released himself. Right. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a sweet story. And then he gets home to Berkeley County late in 1780. The British are starting to poke at Virginia for the first time since the beginning of the war. And the Virginia system is just not raising any soldiers. The entire Virginia line has been captured at Charleston, Camden, and the Waxhaws. They have to raise soldiers, but the system's just not working. Um, so the legislature writes Daniel Morgan a letter saying, okay, we need you to do it. You're famous. People will show up if you ask them to. Uh, so Morgan does his best and he still can't recruit. Now, part of that's because he decided he wanted to raise cavalry, which was a mistake. But he then calls all of his friends, including William Dark, Horatio Gates is there, um, and others from the lower valley, and they come up with a plan that has to be executed by law. They write to the legislature and say, we can't raise soldiers unless you give the draft law teeth. So the legislature does it quickly. They've just been chased by Tarleton from Charlottesville, and they enact a law that basically, uh, if you dodge the draft this is militia draft For a 2-month term, the penalty is 6 months in the Continental Line. If you desert and you take a government-owned rifle with you, you get the death penalty. And if you're in charge of running the draft and you don't do your duty, there are punishments for that too. Suddenly they've got all the soldiers they need, right?
Right.
so so Dark takes control of those soldiers from the lower Shenandoah Valley, and he's a continental officer but with no command. So he's basically running a militia unit. They're then at Yorktown. And then later on, past the war, he is with Arthur St. Clair at St. Clair's defeat in 1791 in Ohio. The only officer to escape that with his reputation improved. Virginia named a town after him. He helped Daniel Morgan suppress the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, and he got in trouble under the Alien and Sedition Acts during the Adams administration. So quite a life.
Yeah, I say it.
And there's enough out there to tell the whole story. One other guy I'll tell you about as quickly as I can is Abraham Kirkpatrick. This is probably the one you were hoping I would
Yep.
share. So he was from Pittsburgh, but not originally. So his father was a Jacobite who fought at Culloden. After the Battle of Culloden, he had to get out of Dodge, so to speak, fled to Maryland, where Abraham was born 3 years later in Cecil County, Maryland. When he was 17, he got into a fight at a horse race and killed a guy. Didn't mean to, but he killed the guy. And decided he needed to get out of Dodge just like his dad had. So he fled west before the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Now, you know what that means, but not everybody listening does. That means it was illegal to go where he went.
Mm-hmm.
The King's Proclamation of 1763 said nobody's allowed to settle west of the Alleghenies. There were people at Fort Pitt, but they were soldiers or traders who were authorized to be there. So he was on the lam. So he went west, kind of a shady character, killed a guy and fled. But he worked his way into a lieutenancy when the 10th Company of the regiment was raised up there. So expert rifleman, he conducted skirmishing across the Delaware in the weeks before Trenton. He was in charge of it for several weeks, something that's not well recorded, and served very well. He was promoted to captain in 1779. That year, when not much was going on, unless you were part of the Sullivan expedition against the Six Nations, he attacked a junior captain named Leonard Cooper with a stick. Now, this sounds silly, but I've researched this, and back then, gentlemen did not fight that way. If you had a dispute with a gentleman, you challenged him to a duel. If you wanted to demonstrate that somebody was beneath you and you held them in very low regard, you would hit them with a stick, or as they said, a cane, or whip them. Notably, this is how masters punish their slaves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Kirkpatrick certainly knew what he was doing when he went after Cooper with a cane. So the fight ends. Cooper, we would say now he was a gentleman. He was willing to let it go. But the other officers said, "Nuh-uh. If you will not defend your honor, we will not serve with you, and you'll have to go." So Cooper very reluctantly challenges Kirkpatrick to a duel. Cooper was probably, I say this in the book, Cooper may have been the better man, but Kirkpatrick was the better shot, and he shot Cooper in the leg, high up. His leg had to be amputated. He was transferred to the Corps of Invalids and was, it turns out, one of the very last Continental officers to be discharged after the war's over. Um, Kirkpatrick, of course, stays in service. He is supernumerary for a while, so he avoids capture at Charleston. Um, he is then attached to Gaskin's battalion that is raised in 1781 in the months before Yorktown. Um, uh, a new recruit named James Grant from Loudoun County finds Kirkpatrick in his tent with his wife, in Kirkpatrick's tent with Grant's wife. Grant loses his cool, grabs a gun, and fires at random into the tent. Takes out Kirkpatrick's eye and a chunk of his eye socket. Is arrested, uh, charged not with attempted murder, but with inciting a mutiny. Is convicted and hanged for it. Nothing happens to Kirkpatrick. Um, Other than that, he has to spend several months recuperating and misses uh, the siege at Yorktown. So Kirkpatrick is a very colorful character. He then, after the war, it was the guy who defended General John Neville, no relation to me, at his house at the peak of the Whiskey Rebellion. I was standing there just shooting back at a crowd. He was a tough customer.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm glad you
so
brought him, I'm glad you brought him up because I think when I read the manuscript, I was making comments about it. Like I was like, oh, this guy is, I mean, it's crazy.
yeah, yeah, no, he was. And if you, he's got one of those table, what do they call them? Table tombs, like one of those
Oh, your
raised
tabletop, right?
tabletop. And there's this long inscription about, like, what a gentleman he was and how kind and decent he was. And it's I kind of beg to differ.
Well, and our good friend Eric Sterner said a dark bio is needed. So I think you've been
All
given
right,
enough. I think, yeah, actually a few other people have said the same thing. So
all right,
I think, and amazing life he had too, right? I mean, just some of these guys, just obviously the vast majority of these men, they serve their service, but then they just go home and live their life. But there's a few of them out there, like the ones you just mentioned, that just seem to be full of drama and
yeah,
adventure.
yeah. There few drama queens. Yeah, there's a lieutenant, Matthias Height, from Dunmore County, who is every time he pops up in the record, he's causing trouble. And he finally, after during the backlash of the loss at Germantown, Washington issued a notice saying that henceforth promotions are going to be on the basis of merit, not on the basis of whose turn it is, because we've got some officers who are just not very good, and he's not going to promote cowards. Matthias Height resigned that day. So you can connect these, you can connect the dots sometimes if you look closely enough.
And his story is something I was going to bring up now is what I like about this is you talk about a lot of these men's lives after they serve,
Mhm.
right? Which is pretty fascinating. Just the fact that your story doesn't end, when the unit is no longer in service. A lot of these
Yeah.
men, as you point out in the book, they go out west, a lot go to Kentucky, a lot of Virginians who serve go to Kentucky and you follow a lot of these different individuals, as they spread out after the war. And
Mhm.
I think that's the most amazing thing about this book is you didn't just stop your research, with their military service, you kept going with it, which I think
Yeah.
adds that personal story, right? We can relate to that because they were human beings just like us, and they had a lot of the same fears and same hopes that we have today, just in a different time period. Um, so, title of the book, where is that from?
Yeah. So, um, I didn't think you were going there. So, so, so the, it's kind of a joke, right? So, well, joke's the wrong word, but um, there were 1,047 men who served in the regiment at any point in time. Um, there were 68 enlisted men in a company, plus officers, musicians, sergeants to 78. So there were 780 sold company level men in the regiment, plus field officers and staff officers, warrant officers. So the regiment starts full, right? Uh, uh, Charles Lee says, I'm taking these guys south because they are the most complete regiment, right? And then people start to die of malaria, people start to desert. Very few of them actually die in combat. Uh, uh, and the numbers just dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. Uh, and the ones who survive, who continue on, they are tough nuts, right? I mean, Kirkpatrick, back to him. So when he's part of Cron's Northern Detachment with Washington, um, they have the equivalent of two full companies when they march out of Williamsburg. Um, by the time they are at Princeton, it appears there are only six of them left.
Hmm.
Uh, the rest of them have died. Only a few deserted. It appears that there is an unreported smallpox outbreak. Um, uh, so I mean, they're just constantly dwindling in numbers throughout the book. Um, uh, but uh, when I discovered that Leonard Cooper, the one-legged veteran, was literally the last man standing, I decided that that was just too awesome, and I was going to name the book that.
That's great. No, I mean, and it's funny, and all the times talking to you about this book before now, I've never asked the
Yeah,
title of the
yeah.
book. It's like, usually people pull a quote or something from, which is, I do that. It's lazy. I think what you did was a little bit more interesting and a little bit more artistic, which is good. Um, so as we wind down, I got two more questions for you. So what makes this unit so special? And I know I'm asking someone who's a
Mm,
fan of it, so we always
yeah.
fall in love with the things we research. But
Mm.
you know a lot about the American Revolution. You know a lot of different units out there. And in your mind, what makes this unit so special?
So they're different from what people normally picture for a couple of reasons. One, they're Southern. As you know, since the centennial, the what I call the 1876 canon of Revolutionary War is very Boston and Philadelphia centric.
Hmm.
Um, it has always been the case that the Eastern events and Eastern people got more attention than Western people. Um, uh, so that makes them different from what people are used to hearing. But judged on just on their own merits, I think of them as quintessentially the first Americans that look familiar to us, right? When we look at the Revolutionary era, uh, you know, we got powdered hair and breeches, slave owning. I mean, all of these things that we don't like or we can't relate to. It just doesn't. They talk funny, right? Um, these guys, I mean, they're like cowboys, right? I mean, it's like Dodge City meets Little House on the Prairie, right? I mean, all of the fixtures from Western movies are there, right? You've got the long migration trails like the Oregon Trail. You've got Conestoga wagons going up and down that trail, the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road. They wear fringed shirts, they shoot rifles, they have duels. I mean, all of this could happen in a John Wayne movie,
Right.
right? Which makes it much more familiar to us. And what they wanted was to go west. They were not focused on, tea and taxes.
Hmm.
They were immigrants who had to go west to begin with because all of the land was taken in the east. Um, uh, they wanted opportunity. They lived in a time when there were no banks, there were no stock markets, there wasn't even any precious metal currency to speak of in the colonies. The only durable form of wealth that existed was land. So if you wanted to become self-sufficient, if you wanted to become prosperous, if you wanted to become wealthy, you had to have land. And the only place to get it was on the other side of the Alleghenies. That's where they wanted to go. And fundamentally, that's what they were fighting for, the right and the ability to do that. And after the war, that's what most of them did.
Right. And you touch on that too a little bit. I was going to say that you really go into in the book a lot of different reasons and causes for these men fighting. And it's interesting when you study the war and learn about, like you said, Boston and Eastern centric type. You know, each of these men have a different reason for why they did what they did, right? And it's
Mm,
not always easy for us or black and white for us to just say why they did it, but I think, as you said, a lot of the reasons these men, generally speaking, are fighting is a little bit different than the men around Boston are fighting, or maybe the leaders and the Sons of
mhm.
Liberty are fighting, right?
Yeah.
But do you ever, it's great analysis talking about how that they are kind of look something we would understand today more than the powdered wigs
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the other things.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me comment on that just
mhm,
briefly. So if you read the Declaration of Independence, which all of us are supposed to do in school, we all have the first few sentences memorized.
right,
And that, the final bit about, our lives and our sacred honors at the end. But there are 28 grievances in it against the king. And most people know exactly one of them, taxation without representation. There are 27 others, and some of them are very specific to the time and place in Virginia. An
right,
example, uh, the king had begun vetoing statutes erecting new counties, right? So Virginia was actually uniquely good about delegating and dispersing local power. It was happy. It was always happy to create new counties as populations grew in the West. Pennsylvania was terrible about it because the Quaker Party in the East wanted to maintain control. North Carolina was terrible at it. That's what led to the Regulator Rebellion, right?
right.
Virginia was always great. You might remember earlier when I was listing the different companies, you had an Augusta County company, and then you had two companies from the West Augusta district.
Hmm.
They had wanted to create a county, and the king said no. Mm-mm. People in the West were too rebellious, and he was not going to give them extra votes in the House of Burgesses. Well, that flipped on its head. That's disenfranchisement, right? If you lived in
Right.
Pittsburgh, your county courthouse was Stanton, Virginia.
That's a haul.
It's a long way, right?
It's a haul
And
today.
so that means that, like, you didn't have a courthouse to go, do whatever you needed to do. You didn't have your own delegates to the House of Burgesses. You were disenfranchised intentionally, right? And that made them angry. There was also a moratorium on naturalization laws. Well, this regiment was 80% immigrants, right? You can bet that they didn't like that. So
Right.
I encourage people to read those grievances. There's a lot of hints in there about what made people mad back then that we don't really remember.
Right. And you go into the immigration, point that you just brought up. A lot of these guys are recent immigrants and they
Mhm.
have different views of how Europe is, right? So,
Yeah, well, they
um,
fled. I mean, they fled tyranny
right,
for sure,
right.
political and religious.
Hmm. So last question for you really quick here, and it's a big question, so I apologize for holding off to the end, Gabe, but what was one of the hardest things about writing this book?
I mean, honestly, sticking with it sometimes. I
Right.
mean, it became an obsession sometimes, and then, um, there were times when I told my wife I wanted to smash my computer. It's a big book, right?
It
And
is.
it took a lot of work, and I just had to keep at it. So, there were times when you know, I never got bored with it, but I would get frustrated with it sometimes. Um, yeah, that's my answer.
Just something so encompassing, right? I can see how it's such a big project, right? Sometimes
Yeah,
you can't see the end of it when you're in the middle
yeah.
of it. You're very
Yeah,
frustrated.
on that point, I say in the introduction that it was kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. There was a million little pieces, and I didn't really know what each piece really was until I found the piece that was next to it, right? And it
Right.
uh, it came into picture. That was pretty cool when I was able to connect dots that I looked at before and couldn't have connected.
So you're doing a lot of book talks. I'm sure a lot of lectures coming up.
Mhm.
And if you tell everyone where they can learn more about where you're speaking and your website, and your social media page. If you can mention that a little bit, because
Mhm.
every day you put something up there. I have no idea how you do that. There's 7 or 10 of us on the ERW side, and lucky we get a blog post a week.
Well, there's a secret to that sauce. So I have a website. It's 8thvirginia.com, 8thvirginia.com. You can see it behind me somewhere if it's big
Mhm.
enough. Um, uh, I've had that website for more than a decade. There's a blog on there. There's articles. There reference resources on there. I'm contributing less to that now. Using it mostly for book promotion, for the reenactor group. Um, and I've started a new website, which I'm expanding the aperture a little bit to Virginia. That is Virginia1776.com. And I'm inviting other people to contribute to that as well. I'm not promoting that yet. I want to load it with some more content before we start promoting that. But and I have a Facebook feed, Eighth Virginia Regiment Facebook feed, which I'm going to try to convert into a Revolutionary Virginia Facebook feed sometime in the coming months.
And the best thing about that particular social media account is you post pictures of graves, houses,
Mhm.
that relate to these men. It's amazing the places you have gone. And there's a lot of pictures in here of these places in that book, but
Yeah,
not as many as you have on your social media page. I mean, you're constantly posting random graves of men that fought in the Eighth Virginia. And I think that is like one of the best things. I enjoy following your stuff because I'm all about trying to get to the site, get to the places where these men were and the actions took place, and you do that. So not only are you a great academic historian in writing a great book and researching it, but also including that public history part, which I think is so important for remembering their story.
yeah. There are some neat places connected with the Eighth Virginia. I've got a blog post showing houses that survive. There's a two-parter with I think all of the known grave sites. Um, there's a house in Shenandoah County that is the house that Colonel Bowman grew up in. That is almost all they've done is add electricity.
Wow.
It's otherwise virtually unchanged. It's uh, it's owned by Bell Grove. Um, so yeah, I've gotten to visit some pretty cool places.
Yeah, it's
But let
amazing.
me tell you, the best thing I got though is a uh, somebody saw my website and sent me an email saying I have a letter from my ancestor, and that letter I believe, and maybe somebody watching this can prove otherwise. I believe it is the only surviving letter home to mom and dad from an enlisted Revolutionary War soldier. It's in German. Uh,
Hmm.
my brother, who is an art historian and speaks fluent 18th century German, translated it for me. But it's a remarkable artifact. It's in the book.
Wow, it's great to have that relative on hand, right? To
Yeah,
transcribe.
yeah. That I my head just about exploded when I saw that thing.
Well, that's great. All right. Well, thanks again, Gabe, for everyone listening and watching. Again, it's the last man standing right there. Last men standing, sorry, and 8th Virginia Regiment in the American Revolution. Can't recommend it enough. It's of all the different unit histories I have read on the war, this is the most comprehensive one. And congratulations to you for finally getting it out. I know it's weight off your shoulders, but if you don't already own it, for those who are listening and watching, please go out and buy it. It's fantastic. Check out Gabe's website, and he's listing places. I know he's speaking this week in DC at Anderson House, but I'm sure there's
Mhm.
lots of other places you'll be speaking in the next year or so promoting this book. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Gabe, for taking some time to talk with us tonight. And everyone have a good evening.
Thanks, Rob.